Welcome everyone to the last session for today. My name is Lenore Cairncross and I'm from International Finance Corporation, part of the World Bank Group, and welcome to our session on sustainable buildings, and I'm covering the return on investment. So with me I have four panelists. I have Marco Marcagnone from Bentley Associates. Perhaps you can just introduce yourself.
Yes, so can you hear me? Okay, good. From Bentley Associates International Architecture Firm, based in Johannesburg with an office in Mumbai as well. And multi-sectoral influence, we deal with everything from retail, hospitality, residential, healthcare, you name it. So a good cross-spectrum influence. And my particular expertise to comment on this topic, having done green buildings in the past, as well as busy completing a PhD in sustainable development.
Thank you. If you don't mind, I also sit, I think people have been sitting in the last few sessions. So next we have Bruce Walker from Verde Hotels, he's the CEO. If you'd like to give a brief introduction.
Thanks very much. Yes, my name's Bruce. I'm from Verde Hotels, which is a green hotel management company based in Cape Town. We're relatively new. We've entered the market in 2013, and we build and manage green hotels.
Great. And last we have Chilu Lombe from Solid Green Consulting. They're green building consultants, and maybe you can just give a brief overview of yourself.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, my name is Chilu. Company is called Solid Green Consulting, and we are sustainability consultants. We work primarily in sustainability, green building ratings, but also we've got a particular focus on energy efficiency. We do a lot of building energy modeling work, trying to predict how buildings are going to actually work in operation and where the savings might lie.
Great, thank you, Chilu. So I've been asked to just give a brief introduction, basically like a 10-minute overview as a presentation. So why are green buildings important? Basically, green buildings, if we think of the number of, if we think of some of these demographic trends, we have 90 million per year growth in emerging markets of the middle class. We have very high rates of urbanization, where 1 in 3 people will live in urban areas in Africa and Asia. And we have about 16 trillion that could be invested in the green building or the green space by 2030. So there's a huge investment opportunity. Why should we focus on green buildings? As part of the global climate focus, 33% of energy is consumed in buildings and 40% of water. So if we're looking at being more resource efficient, then it's a good idea for us to focus on green buildings. And then also, about 18% of greenhouse gas emissions are currently coming from buildings. So as part of the climate mitigation and climate resilience strategies, it's important for us to look at green buildings. And then just a very quick basic of what makes a building green. It's efficient design, energy efficient appliances, building techniques, and then meeting a green building standard. In South Africa, we have the Green Star standard, which is used in various countries in the world. They adopt LEED. There's also the IFC's EDGE standard, which I will go into. And then if we want to actually adopt a green label, it needs to meet some kind of standard. And that's why we go through the certification process of either adopting an EDGE or a LEED or Green Star. So in terms of the benefits, often there's a perception that going green is very expensive. And some may think of it as being almost 30% more expensive, but it could be as little as between 1 and 3%. And one could actually get the payback within 2 years. Some of the costs that can be minimized would be by going into the process much earlier in terms of the design. We've, when speaking to developers and architects, we find that if the green philosophy is taken into account much earlier in the process, then there isn't actually that much of an additional cost. And then just in terms of market trends, in South Africa over the next 3 years, when they did a global study of green buildings, those that were surveyed in the study said that 40% of the new buildings would, of commercial buildings would be going green, and about 31% of residential low-rise buildings, so that's less than 3 stories, would be going green. So what are the benefits? In terms of marketability, if your house is green or certified green, you can then market it as such. If you have a housing portfolio and you may be looking for international investors, more and more development financial institutions are looking for investments where there is a certified green component. So if you have a portfolio and you may be looking to list it even as a REIT, then it could be a more attractive investment if you can demonstrate that you have a green component. In the North American markets, they did a study where they showed that commercial buildings could attract a premium by going green of up to about 10%. They found that in the Canadian market, the buildings that were green certified in terms of LEED attracted a 10% premium on rentals versus just a regular building. So there is actually a commercial case in the developed markets, and one would then want to see whether that can be translated into local markets on the African continent. So in terms of the total business case, if we're looking at from the point of view of the builders, there could be a higher sale price, and this has been found in some North American markets. In Portland and Seattle, they're achieving between 8 and 9%. There could also be quicker sales because more and more consumers are becoming educated about the value of a green home, that it is more resource efficient, and therefore you would have lower utility bills, so the sales could be going through faster. As I said, from a utility perspective, one could have 15% less utility bills. In the South African market, on some of the residential developments that have gone green, they're finding significant savings in terms of utility bills, and much higher than initially predicted in the design stage. So those additional savings of 200, 300 Rand per month, those could go to decreasing the cost for the consumer. And then in terms of financiers, those who rent a green building have lower utility bill costs, therefore they have this additional money in their pocket, which means that their default rate goes down. So in fact, by creating a green mortgage bond, your user of that bond is less likely to default. And just in terms of what is offered by IFC's EDGE program, this is a standard which is 20% more efficient in terms of water usage, 20% more efficient in terms of energy usage, and 20% more efficient than the local standard in terms of embodied energy in the materials. As IFC, we are talking to government in terms of regulations around that, seeing if there can be incentives for the construction industry to go green. Also supporting financial institutions in terms of creating green products, such as green mortgage bonds. Also helping with those looking at innovations around green buildings, and in general having the certification system that then promotes going green. So this is a very simple software that people can use, and it's for free, that actually tells you what your payback is going to be and what your reduction is in terms of utility costs. So it's a tool that can be used in design stage, but it also tells you that kind of return that people are always looking at. What is the return on my investment, or how soon am I going to get my money back? And it can be found there at edgebuildings.com. And just some of the advantages is that it's a streamlined process and it helps in that sort of decision-making process. And in terms of IFC's green building investments, from 2013 to 2017, IFC's invested 3 billion in terms of green buildings, about 1 million square meters in 100 projects with 50 clients and over 20,000 users. So now I'll open it up to my panel. Perhaps we'll start with you, Marco. What are the challenges that you found in terms of, from your perspective, an architectural perspective, in terms of going green and working with your clients?
Well, the first challenge is, of course, changing perception. I think it got a bit of a tough rap in the beginning when green buildings were first introduced into the realm of building. Those initial designs and projects that came out of the ground, obviously through technology, and gadgets, and gizmos, etc., the problem, elevating and escalating project costs, which I think was worth the experiment at the time, but almost set a precedent of nervousness when it came to addressing the issue of green building design. So the first challenge, of course, is always, is it worth the initial expense? Is there initial expense, and is there a return on investment that is actually quantifiable and demonstrated? But what's great is easily the past decade, we've actually managed to see through international statistics that those facts that you've been presenting are in fact real. That there are advantages to it, not only in terms of operational efficiency, but also in terms of return on investment. But that perception still persists. And the majority of the problem, or part of the contributing factors to the problem, is that there's perhaps not enough expertise in the industry with regards to design teams, professionals, etc., to know that designing responsibly, designing efficiently can actually be part and package of how we should do things as a basic service. And if we do the basic principles correctly at the very beginning, then going green is just a label that you're applying to a building that's already been done correctly. And those technologies can easily be accommodated without impacting the wallet. So changing your perceptions is a challenge. And then if I were to think about perceptions in addition to that, I find that the challenge is also the idea that sustainable design is very often packaged with green design. In actual fact, sustainable design is much more complex, and green is an aspect of sustainable design. You need to think about the economics and the social aspect of a development, because those three things feed each other. And there's no good designing a building that's green if there's no one to occupy it, or no one that's happy to occupy it. So you need to look at the full picture, and you need to align the professional team to be able to put that picture together in order to know that your project is a feasible one, has longevity, but is also an efficient one.
Just touching on that in terms of the sustainability, are you saying that it's very important to integrate with the rest of the society and the surrounding communities?
I think the challenge to a sustainable design is a complex one. So yes, you need to look at integration within the socio-economic context. You need to look at what is the available infrastructure that would support the development of this nature. Is the development itself necessary? And can the development change? Is it adaptable to cater towards changing need in the local context? When you're looking at a green building design, you're looking at quality of life. You're thinking more than just bricks and mortar. You're thinking about the people inside of it. So we need to remember that the building is a system. It's a living system. It's not just a product that we walk into and expect to be kept safe from the elements. We have to interact with it, and it's to support our day-to-day. So the building is an enabler. So green building design, sustainable design, it's all about integrating within the user experience. So it's a complex process, but that's why first principles are very important in design. You've got to get those things right. And that, therefore, will pave the way towards a much more effective and profitable solution in the long term.
Okay. Chilu, do you agree with Marco's sentiments on that in terms of sustainable design? What have been your experiences in terms of some of the challenges of going green or helping your clients go green?
I think probably the biggest challenge is in the definition. If someone comes and says to you that they want to have a green building, it means so many different things to different people. So sometimes if they hear that, you come along and then you say you're a green building consultant, they'll say, oh no, we don't have money for solar panels. Whereas in reality, what it should really be about is the performance that you need from the building, whether it's in energy, water, how you built it, or whatever the case might be. So the biggest challenge we find is that most of the time our clients don't actually know what they want when they say they want to be green, because there's various different shades of green, if you will. You know, there's different targets that you can have, and it's great that we've got Bruce here, because one of our projects was Hotel Verde, and there the client knew exactly what he wanted. He said he wanted to have the greenest hotel in Africa, and that meant certain things to him. So it was very easy to then roll that out. On other projects, people don't actually know what needs to go in, but even though there's no definition, there's still going to be estimates. You know, the whole team, everybody's putting in an estimate of this is what it's going to cost to go green, and you don't actually know what they're basing it on, which is why you find a lot of times that there's that 30% premium, 15% premium. On a lot of our projects, what we've actually found is that the buildings can be delivered at a saving, especially because certain items will be attributed to green building design, whereas in reality, those were the architectural principles that needed to be catered for in the beginning. You know, one of the biggest issues we always have is facades and projects. So in the end, if you've got a building where the architectural first principles weren't followed, and you now have someone on the team who can do an appraisal on it and says that you need to change your glass, now all of a sudden, because you were doing a green building, you had to go from single glazing to double glazing, whereas the reality was that because the original solution that you presented wasn't actually one that was going to work in the way that you had presented it. So in a situation like that, if you put the change in the facade to a green building item, then it looks like it's expensive. But when you put it to say this was your actual baseline, then it's quite a different story. So I think that perception and who does the estimates and when do they do it, that's a big problem, because normally the green building idea gets thrown out before you've even gone too far because of the overestimates.
You know, Chidi and Mark have answered the questions incredibly well, so I think they've stolen the limelight there. But I'll speak from a hotelier's perspective. And from our perspective, we build hotels for owners. And these owners' perceptions are that it's going to cost them so much more. They don't actually understand that the disparity between going green, like both the gentlemen have just said now, and going and building to traditional building methods, it's actually gone down so much. You know, it's literally, Chidi just said now, sometimes it's actually even cheaper. But, you know, we found that we can build probably for perhaps 7% more than the traditional building methods. But the long-term benefits are so huge. It's a no-brainer. I don't know why people don't see it.
Just perhaps from your perspective, is there a significant demand for clients wanting a greener tile?
Yes, there is, and there isn't. So if I can answer it like that, I've just asked Marco. Marco's, I think they've got 600 rooms under construction at the moment, and I asked him, I said, look, so how green are they? He said, actually not very green at all. So there are a lot of people out there that are not building green, or not bringing the whole sustainability concept into their building methods. However, people that want to build green come straight to us because there's so few hoteliers or hotel management companies around that do what we do. So for us, it's significant, and we do get many questions, and a lot of people do come to us.
And perhaps I can open it up to the floor in terms of other experiences. What have the challenges been in terms of going green? Do you find it's easier in the South African context versus other countries in Africa? What have been some of the experiences? If anyone would like to contribute.
Additional cost. I think we're developed by looking at maximizing your returns. And I think so far, we need the expertise in this training of buildings to kind of justify why you have to sacrifice on the returns from a development point of view, because the feasibilities are often very much compressed and put in a tool. So to justify additional
Yeah, I very much appreciate it. Very often you'll find that a developer looks to conceive of a project, got specific yields in mind, and there's a lifespan to your involvement in that project, at which point you would walk away, potentially sell it on or sell it in pieces. If it was a residential development, you would sell your units, and the involvement is limited. So you look at what are the short-term benefits in terms of the bottom line, and would those short-term benefits be complemented by this approach of building design? And it's a challenging one, and I think the problem will continue to persist. But that's why the focus needs to perhaps move away from us talking about green building design towards just that is the way. We're getting better and better and better at making sure that our buildings are more efficient by basing it on good first principles. So you need to be able to rely on a professional team that is doing the design responsibly from the beginning. Because then you'll find, with or without an accreditation, with or without a badge of honor or a rating from whatever organization you might be wanting to deal with, that your building is actually performing well anyway. And that's really what we should all aim towards doing. That green building doesn't become a label, but it becomes just the way we work without having to impact the market. But hopefully, by putting the label onto it, by dealing with organizations such as EDGE, such as the Green Building Council, etc., you'll find the same might apply as it has done in other countries, including those that you've referenced in your statistics, that an increased marketability, an increased possible lease or the sale value is possible by virtue of the fact that it has this recognition as being better. Why do people spend more on a Mercedes as opposed to a Volkswagen? Because they know they're getting quality. And quality might therefore be ascribed or assigned to a building that has got green building principles attached to it and is rated accordingly.
And I think just to add on to Marco's answer there, a lot of times I think as developers, one of the keys now in this market that we're in is that tenants are looking for green space, and obviously it makes sense if you understand how to deliver that. So even though initially it does seem like it comes at a cost premium, I think that you should really now be putting more pressure on your consultants to unpack those costs and to really see where the extra lies and is that really what it is? Because a lot of times that extra, that perceived extra is a rule of thumb. It's not really that someone has gone and worked out that for your specific situation you need to do X, Y, Z. But if you had a building and you said, guys, how do we make this green? The next day you're going to get green budgets. But there isn't really much unpacking of your particular building that's going on there. So a lot of times now we've got clients where they're doing a bit more on educating themselves. So we'll go there and we will do a workshop, not on greening of a particular building, but just talking about it in general and trying to talk to all the development managers that are there so that when someone starts to tell you something about why this is required for your building, that you actually start to understand and you can you can sort of ask them the right questions about whether this is a requirement or that is. And I think you would be pleasantly surprised at what the results are in terms of where your buildings actually sit. Because sometimes you might find that you had already been building green, you just weren't putting a badge on it. But even though you were already building well, no one has told you that, so you're looking for a badge. A good case is projects that we're doing in Nairobi, where Nairobi's climate is fantastic. You can have natural ventilation the whole year. So for them, when they're looking at green building cost premiums, and you say, but you guys don't even have air conditioning in your buildings. So this building already is as efficient as you'll ever get. You've dropped 40% of the load. So you probably don't actually have to do anything, but they would still be expecting some kind of premium for making it a green building. So I think a lot of education now needs to happen amongst people that are our clients so that they know the right questions to now start asking. One of the things I always say on projects is that if you say anything about the type of concrete you want to use or unitized versus whatever type of facade, everyone on the design team has got an opinion. But because they've educated themselves and they know a little bit about it. But when it comes to the sustainability issues, it's a bit of a dark art. People, if there's someone there to tell you it's this, you kind of believe it. So I think that education aspect is probably one that in the next coming years we really have to start pushing quite a bit.
Great. So the other questions? Please can you...
Hi, I'm Fatima from RMU Westport, and I have two comments. One on the edge, because we've actually had a project that's been certified on the edge design. And you quite rightly say there's not that much more that you have to do to get the green building, using LED lights, making water more efficient, etc. So I think that the edge system is extremely user-friendly, especially for developers, because it instantly gives you your payback, and it shows you by introducing certain elements how your sustainability in energy, water, and materials is uplifting or comparable to another competing building in the jurisdiction. My other comment was that I was extremely disappointed earlier today when Marna van der Walt said that office tenants don't place sustainability or green building extremely high in their criteria for choosing buildings. Rather, they were looking at more sort of international facilities, etc., etc. But I think once you go into Africa, and I've been playing in the West African field for the last 10 years, if tenants actually look at it, their energy costs are a very big factor in their total cost of operations or service cost or op cost. And it's disappointing that they don't actually put that high up in the criteria. And I'm hoping that in future they would actually insist on moving into more sustainable energy and water type of buildings, because that is going to contribute to their bottom line.
Thank you. Yes, exactly. And I think in some of the areas, I can just speak from the South African experience, the areas where they've had water shortages, suddenly, commercial building owners are looking at going from black water to potable water, or ensuring that they using grey water recycling within the buildings, and projects that before wouldn't have been approved by management, when there's a water crisis, it suddenly now gets approved. Or when we had energy blackouts a few years ago, then suddenly everybody is like, oh, but what are we doing in terms of energy efficiency, and then people start to look at these things. But in fact, as has been said by our panelists, Marco and Chilu, that we need to be looking at this much early on in the design phase, and if you're looking at it from that perspective, then it becomes part of the way you look at the whole process. And so you don't need to reach the crisis, but sometimes people need to get into the crisis situation to see the benefit. Any other comments?
Well, I think something worth mentioning as well is obviously globally we see that there's an economic recession, people are struggling to think about, should we spend the money or shouldn't we? And the great thing about, or when you consider the green building landscape, is that it really provides the means to think about existing assets in a new way. So much of the discussion around many of the panels today and the sessions has been about what do you do when you've got a new project? But green building really opens up the door to thinking about existing projects, operation. How do you optimize what you have? And by thinking about a problem from a green building point of view, not only do you have the ability to perhaps refresh or reinvigorate an existing development, but you have that ability to make the development more operationally efficient. And I think that unlocks so much potential. In fact, if we look at statistics across the continent, we see that accreditations for existing buildings are 3-4 times as much as people applying for accreditations in new buildings. It's a sector that is exploding, existing building retrofit, renovation, and repurposing. And it's an exciting avenue to consider that green building is therefore something that could be easily attached to that, because not only are we looking at making your products more manageable, more marketable, but also more user-friendly, more sustainable.
Yeah, I think my comments are generally sort of in agreement with what the panelists have been saying with regards to, and I think Chile alluded to when we came to the point about definition.
knowing what it is that you're setting out to achieve when you discuss things like sustainability or green buildings, etc. And also just to agree on the point, and as Fatima as well, we've adopted the EDGE certification. And from when we talk about cost, and the perception of this is a costing way to develop your properties. And in truth, I think the thinking around sustainability and greening is really, I think, is a logical approach to design. Thinking about efficiencies, thinking about green, thinking about sustainability should be the way we generally approach design. And once you put these things on the table with the professional teams, you realize that you're actually not spending much more because you're actually getting a logical solution, a solution that incorporates all of those things in the first instance. And I think the only real cost added to these things, to green buildings at this stage is really wearing the badge. But that's where the cost comes in, you pay for the certification. And I think, that's where it sort of, the EDGE became a thing for us, was that it was really so easy to apply, and I think it's less onerous from a cost and expertise and a point of view, and technical involvement from that point of view. But I think also one of my questions with regards to going green and wearing all these badges is around sort of the valuation of properties when all of these extras have been added to development. And I think what, construction or, the built environment is sort of known as the least innovative sector, probably. Probably there's been no change in construction and how we build buildings for many centuries. But what's great, I think, about when you start throwing things in there about sustainability, about green, is it opens up that door for innovation, new products, new technologies that get incorporated into building, making them more efficient. In some cases, less costly, but I think sort of giving a good life cycle costing to your building. But I'd like to hear from the panelists in terms of valuation of properties, how ready the African continent is to be able to incentivize on that, and what kind of not kickback, but I suppose positives there are in going this route, financially speaking.
Well, very good question. What we found, and we've sort of touched on it today, but the marketing and sales aspect are further down the line. Besides, obviously, return on investment, lowering your utility costs, etc., which is substantial, sometimes 30% of what conventional hotels would be running at. But I think that for us, the huge positive is in the marketing and sales. I mean, we have millennials that our biggest market right now, corporates that have now got a responsibility environmentally, so they now see where they hold their conferences. Is it a green hotel that they're staying at? All this sort of thing. So from besides the immediate return on investment, I think the long-term marketing and sales aspects is something that hasn't really been looked at and is quite significant.
I think from my side, specifically with buildings, is if you're going to be able to prove that you're delivering a better product. So the certifications and all that helps because it gets the conversation starting. But ultimately, green buildings are always about performance. Are your utilities really that much lower? Do people enjoy being in that building a lot more than they would have in another building? And I think once you start to prove those things, then the appeal becomes easy to market. It becomes easy to prove to people because there's still a lot of skeptics out there. If you say to someone that, okay, here's our great new green building, move in. We've got a 4-star certification, or EDGE certified, or whatever it is. Then they move in, and then their electricity bills are still 30 rand a square meter. Then there's no performance, there's no proof. So then you don't really get people wanting those buildings. But the minute people start to get into buildings that are performing way better, they start talking about how their staff are so much happier, they've got natural light, the building is performing well, the electricity bills are now 50% lower. That kind of stuff travels very quickly amongst clients and tenants and people, you know, the anecdotal type things, you know. Whenever we drive past a green building and I say to my wife, that's a green building over there, she'll say, well, why are the lights on? You know? So small things like that are the ones that is going to lead to people actually believing what you're saying, because I think there's a great promise from sustainability and green buildings in terms of what we say we can deliver. And once you actually start delivering, a lot of the things are very quantifiable, and when people can see those things, they will themselves already start to value that more. But I guess to start to get people to that point, someone needs to start off, you know. So you look to the developers and the people who can actually provide this thing to people, if that's what people are looking for.
Yeah, if I were to add on to that, the best way to attach increased marketability to anything is to label it. So the initial expense in getting an accreditation, I think, adds value. Otherwise, it would be an invisible investment. So it need to be explained outside of the initial impression of that particular development. And then you've also got to think to yourself, who are we marketing to? Are we marketing to someone who's looking to develop it to sell it? Are we marketing to someone who's looking to build it to own it? And you know, while the arguments are still similar, it's important to know your target market or your target audience. And for those that are looking to develop and sell, the argument is made that those that are looking to buy it are looking for something that will reap in long-term rewards. I'd like to buy a building that is operationally less burdensome than one that isn't energy efficient. And to those that are looking to build to operate, the same argument applies. It will mean better returns in their pockets in the long term, because not only are they spending less on electricity, but like you say, there's proven statistics to show that a building that's well designed from a green building point of view has increased productivity levels. So a new corporate office for a multinational corporation might want to get 10% extra out of their staff. And so the argument can be made on multiple fronts, but it's important to know who your audience is. But in general, the benefits are across the board.
Sorry, I'll work with Bruce at
Hotel Verde. I've been there since the beginning, and if we look at the marketing and the PR that we've received over the last 3 years, free publicity for what we've done, we're looking in the region of 34 million rands worth of free publicity, which the owner would never be able to put out of his own pocket. It's not something that's come to us. We've actually gone to go hunt that. We've actually pushed the envelope in terms of publicity and getting our name out there and getting what we've done. We're very transparent. If you go onto our website, we've got the Thrivability Report, which talks about our first year of business, of trading, and what the savings that we've done, our utility costs. It's all benchmarks. We were very transparent, and we want to be out there. We want to be able to share the knowledge with everybody in the room here, whoever's interested, to say that there is a definite benefit in going sustainable and building green.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions, or anyone else would like to share their experiences of going green, or what some of the challenges they may have had?
It's maybe just a short comment. Jacob Witter from Solar Reef. Based on what we are seeing at the moment, we specialize in solar solutions, and I think it really supports, especially to what you've been saying, is it comes down to actual return. You know, getting the badges is great, around what you've been saying. So, but it actually really is about the return. We are seeing at the moment plants that's going in with returns north of 20%, and I believe that for most property owners is actually worthwhile returns. So, if you don't want to do it for anything else, at least do it for the returns.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I'd like to ask a question, maybe someone would want to answer, including my fellow panelists. Where do you see future trends in green building and sustainable design heading? Are there any changes to the landscape, or where we would like to see it go? I'm curious.
I think one something that we've noticed quite a bit is outside of the commercial property property market. Like individuals, like people are a lot more interested themselves in sustainability in their homes. Like we always get people that will phone and ask, what can I do to green up my home? So, and if you look at South Africa and Africa in general, if you look at the predictions of how the population is going to grow, I think that having some kind of way of tapping into those people, like all the new buildings, the new homes that are going to be built, so that residential sector and the type of solutions that are going to go in. On the high-end residential, you see it in the type of automation that people are putting into their house. IoT and the cloud and everything on your cell phone and all those type of things are really picking up. And I think that it's probably going to be more in residential that sort of Internet of Things, and that's probably what's going to drive a lot of property, a lot of the industry.
Bruce, if you could maybe, this will be our final comments, I think, because we are a bit over time.
I can't really expand too much on that. Within the hotel sector, there's, it all very much depends on which part of the world you're in, because there's so many different types of greening, depending on, the heat of the soil, etc., etc. So I think we're pretty much there. Obviously, technology will kick in, and there's always technology. But I think what we're really going to see is in the residential market, our homes and so on, that's where the big changes are going to happen. I agree with Julie on that.
I think the 21st century is bringing with it a lot of interesting new challenges. The Internet of Things, as you discussed, the information age, I think is something that's really going to change the landscape. Principles of sustainable development were brought about first in the 1980s, before anyone even knew what the internet was. And so the idea of sustainable development is in the process of flux. It's being changed, it's being reconfigured. And I think what we're noticing is these new knowledge-based societies and knowledge-based development is becoming more and more synonymous with sustainable development. And integration, I think, is key, as you mentioned. The way in which we're going to be thinking about our green building is not a building that is green, it's an integrated building of which has green building components to it. It has aspects where it's placing user experience at the forefront of its purpose. So usable buildings, not functional buildings. Adaptable buildings, therefore, are efficient buildings. And all of that's going to have a part to play when we think about green building. That technological aspect, that aspect of how do we change the way we use and interact with our spaces in the long term. Because sustainable development, its core principle, is developing for the benefits of current generations as well as future generations. So we have to think about the long-term benefits, not just about the benefits tomorrow, not just about the benefits today.
Thank you. And if there are any final comments, does anyone else would like to make? So I hope you found this to be an interesting session, and that perhaps if you aren't already going green, you will perhaps give it some thought and try and look at it from the perspective that there could be a huge return on investment for you. And even if you may not be able to see the benefit today, perhaps in the years to come, you may reap a huge benefit. The other way to look at it is, if you are not already designing green, is will you be ending up with stranded assets? Because green is the way of the future, I think. Thank you. So thank you very much to my panelists, and thank you all for staying for the last session.